The climate for film in the 1960s was burgeoning around the world as the aftermath of the World War came to a close. With that, the scene of young filmmakers eager to get their hands on cameras to make something created a raw sensibility that brought cinema making to an art form. In Hollywood, the genre films being carried over from the 50s were no longer cutting it for the domestic market, let alone the international market. With the tide shifting from an older generation to a younger generation, along with the studio system going away and the Hays Code, made for a playground that filmmakers jumped on. The 60s was an influential era for cinema because of the climate surrounding it. The historical context of many of these films comes from the war or the social change that was being swept through the world. The historical events individually experienced by people make the difference in the way their cinema is. You could see that the camera quality from the United States, France, and Poland all vary during this time. This was a decade where movies were being pushed out every week that would redefine how people looked at movies. While there's mention of different types of cinema from around the world, there is more than what could be published in this video. I encourage you to seek out more beyond what seems to be the easy choices. While only a few filmmakers are able to be mentioned here, there were hundreds of other filmmakers that were helping to collaborate and make history through their perspectives. Groups in France had an effect on the rest of the world. 60's du Cinéma was a cinema magazine in France with two firecracker critics named Luc-Godard and François Truffaut. Other filmmakers in the group were Rohmer, Jacques Rivette, and Claude Chabrol. In their magazine, they would often criticize the monotonous films being produced in Hollywood as well as in France. They hated the big epics and musicals that were constantly being made. The members of the 60's du Cinéma needed something real, more existential, more French. The films this group made used non-famous actors, actual locations, and diegetic sound. Using guerrilla filmmaking techniques, they blew the world away with the feature films 400 Blows, Breathless, My Night at Maud's, and Les Bonnes Femmes.
Eh bien, on fera plusieurs séances.
The left bank was also filled with prominent filmmakers, although their principles of film were not as stringent as the others. They were more relaxed in their approach, while still avant-garde, had more easing stylistic features as opposed to the rugged and raw films of Godard and Truffaut. Agnes Varda should be noted the most as a prominent female director that teetered between the 60's du Cinéma people and the left bank group. Her films were characterized by the female experience. Her husband, Jacques Demy, created the famous musical Umbrellas of Cherbourg, taking the principles of the traditional musical and dramatizing them into a heartbreaking love story. The film La La Land is inspired by this film. Other filmmakers, Alain Resnais and Chris Marker, were also a part of this group. In all, these French filmmakers helped to show others around the world the capability that cinema has. Other influential films came from the Soviet Union. Although closely monitored, some of the greatest films came from Russia and surrounding countries in the 60s. Perhaps one of Russia's greatest filmmakers, Andrei Tarkovsky, managed to take a Chekhovian approach to his stories. Although he was granted more freedom in the 70s, his building blocks in Ivan's childhood and Andrei Rublev took his sensibilities as a filmmaker to a new height.
Ну, прыгай, я поймаю. Ну.
In Poland, filmmaker Andrezej Wajda created 3 films that dealt closely with the war: Ashes and Diamonds, Kanal, and A Generation.
Maciek! 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 No Maciek! Maciek, stój!
The films came out in the 50s, but were influential to the French New Wave group and how they would go about their films, as many of the same principles apply, such as using non-state actors and using on-set light and locations.
Koniec września. Powstanie w Warszawie zbliża się do tragicznego finału.
Other films that were popular in other countries were the comedies in Czechoslovakia. Although connotations suggest otherwise, their films are filled with sarcasm, irony, and characters just wanting to have a good time. An example of this is Jiří Menzel's Closely Watched Trains, a contained film that takes place in a train station. It shows the simple lives of those during the war and how it affects them. Dry humor is the main focus as these characters try to grapple with their existence during the time.
Miloši.
As the glitz and glamour of the 50s began to wane and the studio systems had less of a chokehold on what could be shown, Billy Wilder's The Apartment is a film that shows the ways in which the times were turning.
You know, you see a girl a couple of times a week just for laughs, and right away they think you're going to divorce your wife. I ask you, is that fair?
No, sir, it's very unfair.
What seems to be a harmless romantic comedy also becomes a dramatic character study, revealing a new depth to the human soul that had not often been shown with the Hays Code. The code was still in effect until 1968, when it was finally abolished.
It's absolutely forbidden to cross it, you know that.
Yeah, but my baseball rolled over there. How am I gonna get my baseball?
During the last years, filmmakers had gotten clever in how to get around it. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho has a famous opening scene wherein Janet Leigh gets stabbed in the bathroom that uses jump cuts to create vignettes of a horrendous murder being witnessed. Influences from the early French films and other international countries creeped into the work of so many, some of those being filmmakers like Martin Scorsese, who was watching these new releases every week.
Mrs. Robinson, you're trying to seduce me.
As societal influences crept through the nation, that energy was reflected back in the work. The melancholy of a nation could be felt in the films that were coming out. A few examples would be Arthur Penn's Bonnie and Clyde, Mike Nichols' The Graduate, Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, and Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch. These films took the common genre film and revolutionized how the genre could be. With no Hays Code, possibilities were endless. All four of these movies are famous amongst fans and critics alike, and they came out within 3 years along with many others that shouldn't be forgotten.
You're gonna leave it, huh? What is it?